This movie was not designed for kids so much as for an older audience, which is very clear in its content. Nothing sexual or graphic, but it relates to a fear that, for most people at the time, was very, very real. The fear of nuclear fire bringing an end to everything. After the demonstrations of the incredible power of the nuclear bomb in World War II, an arms race began that many feared would bring an end to the entire world. Secrets were stolen, spies were everywhere, and before people could say, well, this isn't going well, many nations were building their own nuclear facilities and bombs, ready to threaten anyone who might threaten them. The problem with this, of course, is that all it would take would be one person getting an itchy finger and reacting too quickly to set off a chain reaction that could quite literally end the world as we know it. This was, and to some extent still is, an enormous fear that people living in the time had, especially during the height of the Cold War. All it would take was one person hearing a report wrong, or one false alarm, and the world as we know it could simply end. In fact, that very nearly happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, with disaster only being averted thanks to this devastatingly handsome gentleman, whose name I'm sure I'm going to completely butcher. Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov. He was at the time an executive officer on the submarine B-59. To launch a missile, all three senior officers had to agree. A US ship dropped a depth charge nearby, used as a signal to force submarines to surface for identification, though they were in international waters, which the crew of the submarine mistook for an attack, and they were certain that war had broken out. They'd been cut off from radio communication and hadn't been able to communicate with Moscow for some time, leaving them largely in the dark as far as information on what was happening currently. Two of the senior officers agreed to fire their nuclear missiles at the US ships, but Arkhipov refused and insisted that they instead surface and figure out what was going on before making any choices that couldn't be taken back. It was thanks to his actions and keeping a cool head that nuclear war was averted, since if they had attacked the United States ships, it's pretty much a guarantee that the nations would have taken that to mean that the war was on and started bombing each other. Thankfully, this didn't come to pass, but just how easily the situation could have been different may give you an idea of how fragile the situation was. One misunderstanding, one wrong move, one person who loses their temper, and Fallout New Vegas could have been our reality. As much as I've enjoyed those games, I don't think I'd really want to live that way unless I had unlimited respawns and an immortal companion dog, but that's not something I have, so I'd rather the world not turn into a nuclear hellscape, thanks. People looked to their governments for guidance throughout these terrifying times, and in the UK, the government response largely consisted of the building of shelters that may or may not have actually been effective against nuclear warfare, and pamphlets to guide people into how to protect themselves at home. The UK had already been through 2 world wars and had gotten through with an attitude summed up as, keep calm and carry on. Yes, the world might be gone tomorrow, but there's still laundry to be washed and tea to be made today. So get on with it as usual, and what happens, happens. You can and should take steps to protect yourself and your family, certainly. Here are some guides on how to do that. But besides that, just keep to your knitting and things should turn out all right. These booklets that were handed out had some useful information, but were, as experts of the time pointed out, woefully lacking. Most of the information they had was outdated and based on a very different kind of war, the kind they'd fought in the past, not nuclear Armageddon. The information within was often contradictory, like stating that you should take the doors in your house off to build a shelter with, but also that you should close doors to prevent the spread of fire. Many of them assumed that people would have access to tools or skills that they might not actually have had, and didn't tell them how to get those things or where to learn them if they didn't already know. There are quite a few skills that I think everyone should have basic knowledge of in case of an emergency. Things like basic first aid, simple foraging, knowing how to purify water, basic food preservation like canning, drying, or smoking, how to build a simple shelter, things like that. But many people don't know any of those things because the idea that they'd ever be in a situation where they would need those skills seems completely unrealistic. As unrealistic as rage zombies or cloned dinosaurs taking over the planet because of some stupid brat pushing a button and dooming the Earth. People often don't realize just how thin the line is between the security and stability they know and the complete loss of everything familiar. How quickly things can change, how quickly it can all go away, and how terrifying it is when that happens and you realize you have no idea what to do now. Having written guides can help people feel better, and that was the main purpose of those books. Even the people who wrote and distributed them admitted that. They clearly stated that they knew that these measures wouldn't be sufficient. They were more a tactic to keep people calm because in reality, if there was a nuclear war, there was virtually nothing your average person could do about it to protect themselves or their families, and if people realized how helpless they truly were, the panic caused would be far more disruptive than the actual threats. They needed people to feel like they were in control, so those people would continue to go to work and cook breakfast and hang their laundry out on the line like everything was normal to keep daily life functioning. When the Wind Blows was a graphic novel adapted into an animated movie. The art style is very soft and friendly. Much like the beloved children's books and poems, the author and artist, Raymond Briggs, also created, like The Snowman or Father Christmas. The friendly and warm way the story begins only makes the way it ends feel all the more chilling and terrible. The film starts with a fantastic song by the legendary David Bowie, by the same name of the film, showing live action footage of soldiers, bomb carriers, machines of war, before we change to a mix of live action sets and animated characters. The story centers around an elderly couple, James and his wife Hilda. They're retired and live in a cottage out in the countryside where they mostly spend the day puttering about, reading the paper, and just enjoying each other's company and the peaceful environment around them. You can tell they're the kind of people who have been together for a very, very long time and likely can't imagine life without the other. Their children are grown up and have families of their own, so their day mostly just consists of various household chores and listening to the radio. James, when listening to the radio, hears warnings that a nuclear strike could happen very soon. It's pretty clear from how he and his wife react that they liken it more to experiences like they had when they were young with the air raids that took place throughout World War II. They're not really grasping the difference between a bomb that can turn a house into a mass of rubble or a bomb that can turn a city into a toxic crater. They're almost nostalgic thinking about it, remembering the shelters that they had and how they were decorated and how quiet the nights were when the power went out or when everything was shut off to avoid being targeted. It's clear that they're thinking any bomb dropped would be like the ones they remember. Something that could destroy a house or make a big mess, but not something that could genuinely destroy a city block or more. When discussing radiation, Hilda says with confidence that if you can't see, smell, or feel something, obviously it can't hurt you, showing that they just genuinely do not understand the magnitude of difference between nuclear weapons and the more conventional ones that they've dealt with before. James seems fairly well versed in wartime strategies and information, at least from the past, though he doesn't grasp the changed nature of war since his time. He talks about all the different organizations around the world and how he thinks things will go if an attack does happen. After hearing the warning on the radio, James gets one of the booklets that is handed out with information on preparing for a bomb drop, such as saving water and building a shelter out of doors and cushions. Obviously, we know today that a few doors and pillows aren't going to do squat against a nuclear bomb, but like I said, these were measures handed out as a placebo to make people feel better, not to actually save anyone. Hilda even points out some of the inconsistencies, but James insists that it is not their job to reason why, but to do the correct thing as ordered. Many of the phrases he uses are a reference to a poem called The Charge of the Light Brigade. He states several times, "Ours not to reason why." This is from the second verse of the poem. Forward, the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. The poem is about a British light cavalry charge against Russian forces during the Crimean War, the result of a miscommunication and orders being misunderstood, becoming a disaster that resulted in heavy losses and confusion. The poem references that, for the soldiers, orders were not to be questioned, no matter how ridiculous or deadly. Orders were only to be obeyed. While the poem was more to make it seem like the cavalry charge was brave and the men true soldiers of valor for following orders no matter what, for me personally, it just brings up how someone at the top can say something and get a lot of people hurt or killed because of a simple misunderstanding or just flat out carelessness. I think that in the film, the use of the term by James is a little closer to my interpretation of it. He keeps saying it with stalwart belief and faith in those who have their fingers on the buttons, that they're guiding them right and true with all their might. However, it's just not the case. The books and pamphlets were never meant to save lives, just to make people feel better. James is putting all of his faith in a lie, and if he'd questioned it a little more and looked at the reality of the situation, he and his wife may have stood a better chance. For one thing, if they'd thought about it a little more, they might have used the cellar they had the whole time instead of the shelter of doors and cushions. That may very well have made all the difference. If they had stored water and food and supplies down there, and been safe underground where they could stay longer more comfortably, they might have stood a fighting chance. However, while many guides did encourage the use of cellars or basements, many of them lacked information that others had, and there were quite a few that contradicted each other. The book that James had didn't mention using a cellar, so he didn't use it and went by what it said instead. They prepare as much as they're able, following the book until the big day comes and a bomb is dropped, with the couple making it into their shelter just in time. Hilda crying out that the cake she has in the oven will be burned, showing how little they truly understand the magnitude of what's about to happen. She's just thinking about a burnt cake, but the world is about to burn. The friendly colors of the house are scorched away and covered in dust, muting them and making everything look less friendly. From this point on, the sky's welcoming blue is darkened, and there is no sound of birds or crickets. There's no bus, no trains, nothing. For the couple, it seems like their shelter did save them. They're alive and in one piece, though the house looks a mess. When James wonders aloud where the strike happened, Hilda remarks that from the state of their house it looked like the bomb must have landed very close by. Which, of course, isn't the case, but it demonstrates just how little they really understand the magnitude of nuclear weapon. They're still thinking of bombs in terms of the ones that were dropped long ago when they were young, not understanding the difference. They end up forgetting how long they're supposed to stay in the shelter and end up coming out and trying to tidy up their house, wondering why the milk and newspaper haven't been delivered. After all, it was over with now, wasn't it? The bomb had been dropped and things should return to normal. They truly don't grasp that there is no normal life anymore. That life is gone. They also clearly don't understand how radiation works, and the fact that they're touching so many things, breathing in dust as they clean the house for guests that will never come. They're poisoning themselves with every breath and have no idea. What's worse, they didn't cap the containers they put water in, so a lot of it evaporated away. When it rains, they see it as a happy thing and save as much of the water as they can to drink. Anyone who has spent any time on the dark side of YouTube knows just how terrible an idea that is, but they just don't know any better. Over a short time, the effects become obvious. James is doing his best to keep a chipper attitude for his wife's sake, even as they both visibly get sicker and sicker. They were quite plump at the beginning, but have clearly lost a drastic amount of weight, their features sunken in. Every time Hilda mentions something wrong, headaches, being tired, her bones aching, vomiting, a rash, James has an excuse for it to smooth things over. Just nerves, fatigue from living a lifestyle they aren't accustomed to, varicose veins from natural aging. He's quick to explain it all away, which makes me wonder if he was starting to realize the gravity of their situation and just didn't want his wife to know, or if he was really so stalwart in his beliefs that the powers that be were going to save them that he could convince himself that things really were going to be all right. He keeps assuring his wife that once the government shows up, they'll just get sprayed with an antidote, a few pills to take, and they'll be just fine, and everything will be all right. The story gets darker and darker with the environment, and it becomes painfully obvious that they aren't going to make it. One night, they decide to sleep in the shelter, just in case another bomb is dropped. Some of the supplies they had gathered before included paper potato sacks, which at the time James didn't recall the use for, assuming that they were meant to deflect some of the heat from the blast, or to protect from debris, or something like that. Of course, what the bags were really for was to put the bodies of the dead inside so they could be safely stored away from everyone else, with their identifying information kept with them. James and Hilda decide to climb into some of these sacks before they lay down in the shelter, with Hilda asking James to pray. I think at this point that, whether subconsciously or not, they realized they were going to die. James recites the Lord's Prayer, before moving on to mention the Valley of Death, with Hilda asking him to stop. In the comic, the final panels simply fade away as the couple does. The movie is a little more optimistic, showing them, or at least their souls, flying away into a bright sky, implying that they went on to paradise after their death, no longer in pain or suffering. The movie and comic are both well worth looking into, in my opinion. There are a few noticeable differences that make them somewhat different experiences, and they both hit in their own way. And boy, do they hit hard. A lot of the time when people think of war, they mostly think about the governments involved or the soldiers. Young people like James's son, who seems to be having a mental breakdown that we only see from James' point of view during a phone conversation with his son, probably understanding the gravity of the situation far better than he does, and possibly being terrified of being drafted as a healthy young man. People think about the soldiers, about the commanders, about the officials shouting from stages about king and country. But the people who are by far the most affected, save the soldiers themselves who die in battle, are the everyday people whose lives get torn apart by choices they have no say in and situations that they have no control over. Children whose homes are turned into rubble, and families killed because someone says a poorly written fantasy novel told them to. Elderly couples who watch their family farm burn, their house turned into a crater because of the choices of someone far away sitting at a mahogany desk and signing a sheet of paper that spells their doom without ever having met any of the people they're condemning. Men and women, young and old, innocent people who are just trying to live their lives, all turned into nothing but a statistical number by someone who doesn't see them as people. These are the costs of war, and it's something I think a lot of people need to be reminded of. When people talk about dropping bombs or clearing out cities, it's not just enemy combatants or rebels or whatever who are affected by it. The people who are affected the most, by and large, are completely innocent people who are just trying to get by. Parents raising their children, an elderly woman running a soup shop, people like James and Hilda, people who are just like you and your family and all the people around you. It's very easy to slip into an us versus them mentality, and that's what many people want us to do. It's a lot easier to condemn someone else to suffer or die if we don't even see them as a real person. We have to never, ever forget that they are real people, just like you, just like me, just like your parents, your grandparents, your children, your brothers and sisters, just like your neighbors and everyone else around you.
Them? Us. Look at them. They are us. What differences do you see?
Different skin, different religions, different clothes or music or whatever else. At the end of the day, we are all human. Truly evil, unforgivable atrocities happen when we forget that. Thank you all for joining me. I know this one was a little heavier than some of the others, and I will try to keep things mostly lighthearted around here, but I felt like this was an important point to make. Be safe, stay warm, and I'll see you in the next one.